Hi folks, it's Mr. Ray here. This is a video where we're going to look at one of the types of quadratic word problems that you'll have on your assignment for this week, and the homework for this week, which there could be one of these types of questions on the assignment on Friday this week. Just a reminder, there's a document with the 30 word problems that I'm asking you to work on. Um, so the assignment this week will be 5 of those problems from the 30 will be exactly the same, and there'll be one extra problem that you haven't seen before. Okay, so if you do the work on the 30 questions, you should be in great shape. Okay, so this first type of problem is, we call it a two-number problem. So basically it's you're given some relationship between two numbers, and you'll be asked to find what are those two numbers. Okay, so in this case, the question is pretty short and sweet. Not too much information in terms of equations or numbers. The sum of the squares of two consecutive integers is 841. What are the two numbers? Okay, so anytime I'll ask this in this unit, you can't just guess and check and there's the answer. I want you to actually work this out through a quadratic model. Okay, so now in this case we have to do some interpreting some math words into English words. So things like the word sum. Okay, so sum is just when you're adding things. So replace that with the symbol plus. So the sum of the squares. So we're squaring two things together. What are we squaring? We're squaring two consecutive integers. Okay, so that's really important. So we're taking each of these integers, we're squaring it, and then we're adding the two together. So let's at least begin by, before we can even start creating an equation, we've got to have a variable. Okay, so the question is, what are the two numbers? So every time you see a question like this for the first time, you'll say, oh, let's just let x be the first number and let's let y be the second number. But you can't do that because there's really only one variable in this. Okay, now there's a really big clue here. Tells you that two consecutive integers. So if I could just get started, and sometimes if you get stuck, just put pencil to paper and let's go. Let's draw a picture. Let's write something down, and a lot of times it'll come to you because you start thinking things through, looking at options. Sometimes you make mistakes, that's fine, but at least you're trying things. So what I would do is say, okay, let x be the first number. And when I say first, it could be the lower of the two numbers. Doesn't really matter. The first number. Okay, so for example, maybe the number is 5. Okay, so if the first number really was 5, well, what would the second number be? Well, it's consecutive. So consecutive means in a row. So if one was 5, the other one could be 4, could be 6. So in this case, if we assume that the x is the lower number, then the higher number would be 1 more than x. So instead of wasting a variable and another variable, we could say, well, if the second number is just 1 higher than x, let's just call it x plus 1. So let x plus 1 be the second number. And because we're told this relationship that they're consecutive, we can build that in and just have one variable x. So the first number is x, the second number is x plus 1. So now we got something to go on. You put brackets around there if you'd like. So now we can start building the equations. So if I said, well, I'm adding these two things, the sum of the squares of two consecutive numbers, integers, is 841. So I'm going to be adding two things together, and the result will be 841. Okay, that's pretty clear. But what am I adding together? I'm adding the sum of the squares of these two numbers. So I'm taking each of these numbers and I'm squaring it. So I'm squaring x, and I'm squaring the other number, which will be x plus 1. So now I've got something I can get going, right? And it's always good to read this back and make sure you got it right, because I've seen some people, add them together and then square the two things. So you have to make sure that this makes sense. The sum of the squares of two consecutive numbers, x and x plus 1, is, and the word is in English, if you're interpreting that into math, that's always equals. Something is something, like x is 5 means x equals 5. So whenever you see the word is, you can just basically replace that with an equal sign, and the rest of it kind of comes into place once you've interpreted your math knowledge there. Okay, so we've got an equation to work with now. Now the first thing I'm going to do, well, I can write the x squared without the brackets, but I can't remove the brackets here. So I basically have to, figure out what that whole thing is. Now, please be careful on this. This is not x squared plus 1 squared. This is, x plus 1 times x plus 1. I don't know how many times I see this, people forgetting that this has to be expanded like a binomial. And when we do that, it's, we're multiplying 4 things 4 times. We actually get x squared plus 2x plus 1. Okay, so, if you can see, if I just thought that was x squared plus 1, I've totally left out the 2x, and, this will not work out right away. So very important that you get this right. Now I can do some simplifying here. So I can add the 2 to x squared and x squared to get 2x squared plus 2x plus 1 equals 841. Okay, so I've simplified this side. Now remember, when we're basically trying to solve this equation now, we're trying to find the value of x that makes this true. That's the whole goal of what we're trying to do here. And once I find what x is, that gives me the first number, and then I get the second number by adding 1 to it. Okay, so remember, when we're solving equations, we always had 2 ways of doing it. We had factoring, and we had using the quadratic formula. And either way, we always had to have a 0 on one side. So we're going to have to subtract 841 from both sides. And when we do that, we get a 0 here when we do it on this side. So 1 minus 841 is negative 840. And now we're at the point where we could actually solve the equation. We could try to factor it. We could use quadratic formula. Now there's a pretty big clue here. The fact that they're integers that we're looking for, that'll mean that this is factorable, but you don't have to factor. In fact, I would rarely factor on these questions. I would usually just go to quadratic formula and do it that way. Now, there's a little secret here. Hopefully you've seen this on some of the questions before. If you notice all these numbers here, they're all even. So that means I could, I could factor out a 2 here. And when I do that, I get that trinomial left over. Now, here is the cool thing, and I've shown you this before. Hopefully you remember. The fact that this is a 0 on this side means that I could divide both sides by 2 right now, and the net effect of this is that 2 just goes away, because if I divide both sides by 2, I get this. Okay, now why bother doing this? Well, you don't have to. You could take that and use quadratic formula. A is 2, B is 2, and C is negative 840, but it's always nicer to work with smaller numbers if you can, especially if you see that you could easily factor a 2 out because they're all even. And even at this point, if you felt ambitious enough, you could probably factor this. It is factorable. We're not going to, I won't do it this time, but I'm just saying, because a lot of times it's not factorable. So it might be more efficient use of time to use quadratic formula. So at this point, I'm going to go straight to the quadratic formula. I'm going to just repeat A is 1, B is 1, and C is negative 420, and go to the quadratic formula. So that's going to be x equals negative b plus or minus b squared. So b squared is 1 squared, which is just 1, minus 4a, which is 1, and c, which is negative 420. And that's all over 2a, which is just 2. Okay, so let's figure out what's inside here. Plus or minus the square root. Okay, so that's a 1, and then I've got 2 negative signs here, so that means I'm going to be adding. And I better be adding, because if I'm subtracting, I'm definitely going to get a negative under the square root. So 4 times 420, that's going to be 1680 over 2. And that's going to be square root of 1681, and if everything is good here, that should be a perfect square. So if we do 1681 square root, it's 41. Okay, so I can simplify this to x is equal to negative 1 plus or minus 41 over 2. Okay, now you could branch this off. Maybe I'll do that just to show you what I mean. Let's move that up, sorry. So if I do the plus branch first, so that's negative 1 plus 41, so that would be 40 over 2, so that means x is 20. And if I do the minus branch, negative 1 minus 41, that's negative 42, divided by 2, x is negative 21. Okay, so we actually got 2 answers for x. So here's a really common mistake. People say, oh, the 2 numbers are 20 and negative 21. Well, that can't be true because these are not consecutive. So you're thinking, well, what does it mean? If you're not sure, you just go back and see what x is supposed to represent. X is the first number. So in this case, we said it's the lower of the 2. So if x is 20, what's the second number? Well, if the lower number is 20 and the other number is 1 more, that means the second number is 21. And that makes sense. If you actually square each of these and add them together, you will get 841. But what's all this here about negative 21? Well, negative 21 is an integer. So we've kind of gotten the habit of sometimes saying, well, negative numbers, don't work in a lot of cases, and in a lot of cases they don't. But in this case, negative 21 represents, x represents an integer, and negative 21 is an integer. So if the lower number is negative 20, the next one, the one that's 1 higher, would be negative 20. Okay? And when you think about it, well, these are 2 consecutive numbers. If I square each of those, I think I get, what do I get here? 400 and 441. If I square this, I get, don't forget, negative times negative is positive. If I square that, I get 441. If I square that, I get 400. So both of these are valid pairs of numbers. Sorry if you didn't see that. These are the 2 pairs. So when I answer the question, therefore, the possible pairs of integers are 20 and 21 and negative 21 and negative 20. So a lot of people, if you're guessing, you're probably not even thinking about negative numbers, but by doing this with the quadratic formula, you do see, well, there's 2 possibilities here and they're both valid. Okay, so that's an example of a quadratic word problem that involves finding 2 unknown numbers, every one of these cases, if it's a quadratic word problem, you're going to have a squared variable like an x squared. If you build an equation and there's no x squared, it's not quadratic. So you need to go back and reevaluate how you got your equation. Okay, so that's a good example. So hopefully that's understandable, and we can check out some of the other videos on the other types now.